people start to think about the content as their content and the site as their website, and they stop seeing it as the institution's website. And so many times I find myself saying to people in meetings when they say, well, it's my website, I want to have this. I'll be like, hold up, it's not your website, it's not my website. It's the university's website, and it has an audience that we're trying to serve, and we need to serve that audience absolutely the best way that we can.
Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Tiers from Tutor Collegiate Strategies, and you're about to check out the latest episode of the Mission of Mission podcast, a show that's designed to help higher ed become better recruiters, communicators, marketers, and managers. Each week I'll introduce you to an industry leader or difference maker who will share helpful advice, tips, and strategies that will help you grow professionally and personally. Mission of Mission is part of the Enrollify podcast network. I'm excited to share my latest candid conversation, so let's get started. Hey everybody. It's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 23 of the Mission Admissions podcast. On this episode, I have the absolute pleasure of chopping it up with one of the best strategic marketers, communicators, and leaders in higher ed, who also loves walks on the beach, turtles, and in her spare time, paints and hosts her own Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO podcast, the one and only Jaime Hunt. So welcome to the show, Jaime.
Thank you. I was pretty sure you were describing somebody else until you got to the podcast episode. I appreciate that.
Jaime, there's so much I want to cover with you today, so let's dive right in. How would you define the current state of enrollment marketing right now?
Oh, wow. I think there's so much tension in this space right now for higher ed marketers. The enrollment cliff, if you want to call it that, or the post-traditional student demographic growing, or it's really a demographics shift. But I'd say we're all in a state of panic of varying levels. Like, what are we going to do to kind of address this looming shortage of traditional aged, honestly, white students?
And so what has your attention then, if that's something that I assume, right, you at Old Dominion, your colleagues are thinking about, anything you're willing to share, what are you thinking are things you need to focus on maybe in the second half of 2023 then?
Yeah, so I think we're really having to think about who our audiences are. One of the big benefits that we have here at ODU is we are right down the road from the largest Navy base in the country. So we really need to turn our attention and our focus on those military students. And a lot of those will be non-traditional students. They'll be students who join the military and are, just now, after several years looking at getting a degree. We're looking at how our online programs can grow. We have about 6,000 online students. We're hoping to double that over the next 5 to 7 years, grow that population. And that also serves those post-traditional students, whether it's students who started college but didn't leave with a credential, or the students who they started their lives, got careers or whatever, married, all of that, and now they're looking to get their degree. So I think that's a big priority area for us. Of course, most schools, I think, are looking at how graduate programs can grow, and ours we're trying to grow those as well, and we're being fairly successful with that. But I think kind of lessening the need to be recruiting those traditional age first-time freshmen is something that I think probably most higher ed institutions need to look at right now.
So if we'll say everybody's kind of looking at the same thing, Jaime, how do you feel like schools are going to then differentiate and say, well, if I'm looking at non-traditional students or any of those groups that you just mentioned, how do you differentiate, in your opinion, in 2023 when it comes to, we'll call it right, your brand, and in your case, ODU?
Yeah, it's a big challenge because we're basically all doing the same thing. There's, thousands of schools across the country basically providing the same service to students all over the country. And I think where there's opportunity to sort of flex and to be more differentiated is by creating experiences that are really, really convenient and flexible so that non-traditional students can have the support and the guidance that they need to be able to be making choices in a more concierge sort of way, with traditional age first-time freshmen, you're really following a prescribed path that students all over the country are following. You're applying by December 1st or February 1st, and you're making your commitment by May 1st. Then you're going to an orientation and registering for classes and starting in the fall. For non-traditional or post-traditional students, instead, I think we have to look at how do we provide a more concierge experience where they're getting accepted into their programs within 24 to 48 hours of applying, because that's what a lot of the for-profit and online schools are doing. So you want to be first out the gate doing things like that, providing a really hands-on support as they navigate applying for school, because they're not doing it in a cohort with a bunch of other people that they know. So if you're a first-time freshman, you can ask your counterparts at high school, what are you doing about this? Or what have you done about that? Or you have guidance counselors that can help guide that. I think the schools that are looking to recruit both graduate students and post-traditional students really have to look at that more concierge experience to help those students get through all those little roadblocks that we set up for them in higher ed to get to enrollment, how we can help them navigate all of that, because they're probably doing it themselves. They probably don't have others in their lives doing the same thing.
How are you getting all the other stakeholders? Because I know you've done this at Miami and other places you've been on the same page when it comes to saying, all right, if we're going to give more of a concierge type service, whether it's to traditional or non-traditional students, how do you get the other stakeholders to all be on the same page, knowing hopefully you can deliver what you want to deliver?
It's definitely a huge challenge. And what I think it has to come from is the top. You have to talk to your senior leadership about, this is what the marketplace looks like right now. Maybe you're even applying for a program at a school that's nailed this and talking about, this is the experience that I had. Bringing people in to have those conversations with enrollment management and admissions about, how do we align in providing an experience that's more concierge? I know my husband, he led the marketing for Miami Online when we were both at Miami University, and he brought in people from OEMs. He brought in folks from some of the schools that have really excelled at providing online and had them actually sit and talk to the leadership about what they were doing and what they recommended doing. And it was spend a ton of money and offer this concierge experience. And that's where I think, really exposing the leadership to some really successful schools and what they're doing, it paves the path for that conversation.
Alrighty, we're going to play a game, guys, okay? So, first and foremost, get a pen, get a paper, pull out your notes app on your phone, whatever it might be, okay? Got it? Great. All right, what keywords does your website currently rank for? Take a couple seconds, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I give you a few, not just a couple. What doesn't it rank for that you think it should rank for? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what are a few keyword opportunities that you could be winning on if you just simply tweaked some of your existing website copy? Got it? Okay, how'd you do? Ooh, not so hot. Not sure what you're currently ranking for, or not sure what you could be ranking for? Well, that's okay, because our friends at DD Agency want to help you answer all of these questions. DD Agency is a higher ed specific marketing technology agency that has conducted countless SEO audits for colleges and universities across the country. In these audits, they detail where you currently rank, what you could be ranking for, exactly how copy should be tweaked on website pages, and so much more. If this sounds like something that you could benefit from, give the guys at DD Agency a ping and be sure to mention that Enrollify sent you to claim a 10% discount on any of their SEO offerings. So head on over to enrollify.org/DDA SEO. That's DDA as in DD Agency, SEO, or simply follow the link in the show notes below. That will guarantee you get a 10% discount off of your audit. All right, head on over to enrollify.org/DDA SEO, or simply Google DD Agency, find DD Agency's website, and be sure to mention that you heard about them through Enrollify when you request your audit. All right, folks, back to the show.
Well, and to your point, right, it is about experiences, because I've argued for years we all make decisions based on how we feel. I mean, it's you,
Absolutely.
it's me, it's a 17-year-old, it's a 23-year-old single mom working a part-time job, wanting to go back and finish her degree, start a degree, whatever it might be. And so trying to figure out how to get everybody on the same page, I know is something that's been on my mind lately. Back to marketing though, quality or quantity, Jaime, where do you land on that?
I am 100% in the quality camp. Um, I hate to like out our efforts here from before I got here, but we were throwing a little bit of money at every possible tactic. I mean, it was a list of tactics as long as my arm and throwing just a scooch of money over just a scooch period of time. And I'm a big believer in let's use the tactics that are going to be the most effective. Figure out which ones those are, what is bringing in students, what is actually getting the conversions, and then stop spending money on low return tactics. I mean, it seems like common sense, but it's really tempting to be like, oh, so and so is on Pandora, so we need to be on Pandora. So and so is on OTT, we need to be on OTT. No, what I can guarantee you, probably your number one most successful marketing tactic is search. That drives an insane amount of traffic to our websites, and it drives an insane amount of conversions. So, maybe invest a little bit more in search engine optimization and search engine marketing and a little bit less on those Pandora ads. Everybody loves to hear the ads, they love to see their billboards, but the workhorse is search, in my opinion.
I think SEO is something that a lot of schools need to be investing a lot more time and research in. You've been a part of 5 website overhauls, if I have my math correct there.
Yes.
So, where does a good CMO or where does somebody who's in charge of trying to figure out what needs to be improved on their website, Jaime, like where should they start and what have you seen in those overhauls you've done be good ROI at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think definitely starting with the analytics and the data on your current site before you launch the redesign. What are people looking at? What are people clicking on? Where are we losing people? Can we look at heat maps? I've been at an institution that had the eye tracking software, using that to kind of figure out how people are moving through content. Look, talking to students, right? How did the website serve you? How did you find information on the website? Was it a challenge? All of that, even before you start to, do a wireframe. The website redesign that I'm involved with right now started 2 years before I got here, and I don't think it's perfect. I think there's a lot we can do to fix up the website, but really having a strategy, deciding our website is for prospective students, if that's what your institution decides, and then make decisions based on that strategy. Don't make decisions based on the org structure. Dear God, don't make the decisions based on the org structure. I'm actually going to say that one more time. Don't make decisions based on the org structure. Make those decisions based on what are students looking for, how do we want to drive them through that journey from first exploring who we are and what we offer all the way to enrollment, and make the decisions based on that. I guarantee nobody's reading the dean messages. You probably have to have them up there for some sort of accreditation purpose, but you don't need to make them front and center. There's tons of content that nobody's reading. Doing that content audit, what are people looking at? What are people searching for? And then making that be up front and center, I think is going to make a website project so much more effective.
I feel like in every conversation I've had over the last, I don't know, 8, 9 years at least, Jaime, when it comes to, all right, we want to improve something. What do we need to do? Part of that, I would argue, as you mentioned, is you need to talk to your target audience, aka the people in
Yes.
this case, they're going to be. Why is that such a struggle in your opinion? Is it because there are so many stakeholders, to your point, who all want to, but I want my 2 cents and this? What is the disconnect? Is it just trying to say, how do we get it to look perfect and we're just overthinking it? I mean, just any thoughts on where you feel like the disconnect ends up being, knowing that the current student voice in this case of college websites needs to be a part of the solution more.
Yeah, I think the disconnect happens when you've had more of a homegrown approach to websites. So when you have had departments building their own websites for their programs and that sort of thing, there becomes this like pride of ownership for that site. And people start to think about the content as their content and the site as their website. And they stop seeing it as the institution's website. And so many times I find myself saying to people in meetings when they say, well, it's my website, I want to have this. I'll be like, hold up. It's not your website. It's not my website. It's the university's website. And it has an audience that we're trying to serve. And we need to serve that audience absolutely the best way that we can. That is just really critically important, to be the person in the room who can say that. But you have to have relationships to be able to say that, right? You can't just swoop into a meeting, be like, hey, no, you're talking about this wrong, and then swoop back out. It really has to be a conversation. And sometimes it takes multiple times of having that conversation with somebody for it to really sink in and have them really understand what you're trying to say.
I tell people all the time when I lead trainings, Jaime, relationships take time. I don't care how
Yes.
good you are, how outgoing you are. The thought of, well, I can just do one nice thing for Jaime, who I met 20 minutes ago, and now she's going to do anything I need for her, and we've got this great, to me is laughable, right? And so it makes me wonder how much time, just think back to all the pivots you've made, the different stops you've been along your higher ed journey. How much of those first 30, 60, 90 days, Jaime, was committed to, I have to build relationships with a bunch of people I don't know on this campus if we're going to achieve the goals we want to achieve?
I would say probably 90% of my time here, of those first 30, 60, 90 days, was spent meeting people, having conversations with people, having follow-up conversations with people, really getting to know the deans. The deans are really good allies to have, really getting to know the other vice presidents. I was hampered a little bit in that when I was at Miami because it was COVID, right? It was sort of that peak time of COVID. But there's also something to be said for being in the trenches with somebody during a crisis that helps build relationships. When I was at Winston-Salem State, very, very unfortunately, we had a homicide on campus 4 weeks after I started. And that, although that was an absolute tragedy, I was able to start to build relationships much quicker because we had been in the EOC trying to hash out during a lockdown, how do we respond to this? How do we rebuild the sense of safety on our campus? So sometimes, unfortunately, crisis can be a good springboard for relationships too. But you have to get out there. I also met with a lot of students during my first 90 days and became really connected to a good group of students that I continue to pick the brains of and get their insights, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's not what I want, it's not what the president wants, it's not what the provost wants. It's what do the students want and need, and how can we best provide that?
Everybody, I would argue, wants a personal experience, right? And so, on that note, what do you think, for example, makes an email feel personal in 2023?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I was recently talking with Diane Lamphere about a project she did with her son, where she, over 4 years, tracked all of the admission marketing material that he received during his college search, and then he journaled about it. And in his journal, he actually talked about simply having his name in the subject line and in the email made him feel, more connected to the institution. I say that's fantastic, and that's the minimum of what we should be doing. With the AI technologies that are out there right now and the capabilities of our CRMs, I think we can create much more personalized content for students. That's something we're looking at here. How can we take what we know about a student and more customize what kind of content they receive? I don't necessarily want all my tips and tricks out there, but what we might know about a zip code might help inform us about what that student might want to hear. So if we're talking to a student as a coastal urban institution, if we're talking to a student, in a rural mountain area, we might have to do a little bit more talking about safety and about feeling part of a campus community, because our student population might be 10 times bigger than their hometown population. And so how do we speak to them about that? How do we talk about, if we have a student who's interested in the liberal arts at a university that has a strong STEM program, how do we make sure that we're talking not just about our strong STEM, but also what the liberal arts programs and humanities and performing arts look like here at ODU. So I think personalization in terms of a name, that's great, but true personalization based on what we know about a student, I think that's where the future is in 2023 and beyond.
Totally agree. Anything you can do, not only with email, but any sort of communication, even your website, back to that,
Yeah.
where relevance, right, is predominantly there, is going to pay off. And I would also argue it's how you say what you say too. Does it feel like you're having a conversation, for example, with the other
Mhm.
person, or you're vomiting information all over them, right? There's a
Yeah.
big difference. And do you try to actually engage with them and encourage them through different calls to action to not only maybe go visit, apply, do the things that every college wants students to do, but also ask, Jaime, I just shared this with you. Is this something that's important to you? Jaime, is it? And I feel like I'm seeing more schools take that approach, which I'm a big fan of, and find, wait, when you actually prompt a lot of these students, traditional and non-traditional, to have conversations with you and it feels personal, you'd be surprised at the number of them that are happy to respond and give you feedback that then allows you to continue to build that personal relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think handwritten notes are an art that we have lost a little bit, and that's something that we're talking about as an anti-melt strategy. Having perhaps the chair of the program that they're interested in write a handwritten note or pick up the phone and give a call to make them see that there's human beings on this end and that we're excited to see them and we're here to support them and to serve them. Little things like that I think can set you apart. And that's one area where I think sometimes smaller schools have the ability to be more agile in that way, just because of the sheer numbers of applicants. But I just think it's those little human touches make such a difference. That's something that Denise had talked about. Her son got a handwritten note and was like, wow, it really makes you stand out a little bit.
I would love to pick your brain on leadership a little bit. Why do you think so many leaders struggle with internal communication?
Mm. I think it sometimes is sort of the cobbler's children have no shoes. It's like we are so focused on our external audiences and on things like recruitment and revenue generation that we're not thinking about our internal audiences and the role that they play in being brand ambassadors and being, humans that we live and work with on campus. I think that's a huge struggle. I think there's also this curse of knowledge. As a leader, I know a lot of things. As an executive leader, I'm privy to a lot of stuff that happens at the university. And it's really easy for me, and I'm sure I'm not alone, to think that what I know, everybody knows, because you're not actively thinking about how can I make sure everybody knows this. I don't know if that made sense, but I think curse of knowledge can be a huge communications problem.
So, what have you done that you're comfortable sharing on any of your stops again on your journey that has allowed internal communication to improve on the campus you were at?
Yeah. At Winston-Salem State, it was a huge focus for us. And part of it was hiring a communications manager who really specialized in it because it's a discipline, right? There's different elements of marketing and communications that you can have expertise in. And hiring somebody who has that expertise in internal communications, I think, is a critical piece to that. We made sure that we were thinking through what we needed to share with people, when did they need to know it, and how could we get that information to them? And doing routine visits and focus groups with people to find out how we're doing. The easiest thing to do that we rarely ever do is ask the question, do you feel like you know what's going on? And how would you like to be in the loop on what's going on? Often you'll find so much consensus around those two questions across your audiences that makes it really easy to then have an internal communications campaign that hits those pain points. But the key is you have to ask. And I don't know why we're so scared of asking. I genuinely don't.
I wonder sometimes if we just were afraid of the answer we're going to hear.
Yeah.
I feel like fear probably in some shape or form for a lot of people is part of it. But to your point, right? Leadership is hard.
Yeah.
Leadership is hard. What is the hardest part though for you about being a VP if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah. I would say um, being a VP is an incredible privilege because you are entrusted with leading a group of people and leading an aspect of the business of running a university. But, as with so many things, it can be very lonely to be a VP. I think especially a VP of communications and marketing, in a lot of ways, because you know so many things that you can't share with other people. And that just kind of automatically puts a little bit of a barrier between you and people that you might be, friends with at your institution. I also think you can sometimes be seen as the mustache twirling villain, like you have some sort of evil machinations that you're trying to do because everybody hates the administration, and that can be a real challenge. And then, I would say the hardest part is managing um, budgets and expectations. I tweeted this morning that often in higher ed, we are asked to do unicorn level work on a budget that affords us a miniature horse and a traffic cone that you can attach to its head. Those miracles that we have to do every day to do that unicorn level work, it can get really tiring to be driving yourself and a group of probably underpaid people, if we're honest, to excellence, sustained excellence, day in and day out, without having the appropriate resources to do that. And that's not a criticism of any of the places I've worked. It's a reality of working in higher education.
What else and I appreciate you being comfortable enough to share all of that. What else besides showing senior leadership above you, Jaime, if you're a VP or even if you're in, a director level, can you do to potentially try to get more buy-in when it comes to getting extra resources, extra funding for different positions or things?
I'm investing a little bit of money into a study that's going to be doing a deep, deep dive into which of our marketing tactics are working and which aren't. And then I can say we have spent, number of hundreds or millions of dollars on this. If I redirect it to this and spend just a little bit more, I can predict that we would have this kind of lift in our applications. If you just are saying, I need more money just because, you're generally speaking not going to get it. Also, I think it's really important to have a good relationship with your CFO, and that they see that you're not the type of person that's just going to ask for money for the sake of having it, that you're somebody who is asking for resources because that is what the institution needs to do in order to achieve its goals.
And back to feeling lonely, if we'll call it that for a minute. What do you do for me time?
I actually get asked a lot, how do I get everything done that I get done in my life? And I am incredibly fast. But for me, in my me time, I paint, I walk on the beach. We just joined a boat club, so I'm going to be going on boat rides. I try to do things that take up my whole brain, so that I'm not in a space of thinking about work while I'm doing something else. It's like having a creative outlet that just sucks up my whole brain power. Get into that flow that makes time disappear. That's really been helpful for me. I read a lot, and I do spend a lot of time on thinking about marketing in a way that I enjoy. So I enjoy working on my podcast. I'm sure you do too. I enjoy writing op-eds. I enjoy talking to people about marketing. And while that doesn't maybe seem like your traditional quote unquote me time, it's those things are really, really give me life. And I think that's really the heart of your question is what are you doing to kind of fill your cup back up?
100%. I get invigorated by conversations like the one we're having right now. And I'm well aware that doesn't do it for everybody. But for me, I don't look at this as work, what we're doing right now. I look at this as an opportunity not only to get to know you a little better, but to also hopefully provide the listeners with some tangible things that they're going to be able to then take and implement on their campus that allow them to not only be a more effective leader, a more effective employee, but also serve the students and families that ultimately, right, are the
Yeah.
mission of so many of these schools. A couple other things I would love to pick your brain on. You've had to hire for a lot of positions based on
Yes.
everything I read right on your social since you got to ODU. Can you give me at least one do and one don't when it comes to hiring new employees?
Yeah, so I would say, and I'm guilty of this too, but make sure you have an onboarding plan. You can't just bring somebody in and say, here's your job and here's your desk and have a nice day. Have a really solid plan for how you're going to onboard somebody. And then ultimately, when you're hiring, think about this. You can teach skills, you cannot teach character. So if you have someone who checks all the boxes in terms of their knowledge, in terms of the things they've done in the past, but they're just a jerk, or they're just, really come across as really arrogant or something like that, you're not going to change their personality. You're not going to be able to change that they have this massive ego or that they're kind of a jerk or whatever. It would be better to hire somebody who checks most of the boxes, but has a can-do spirit or a collaborative heart or, a sense of commitment to excellence, that kind of thing, than it would be to hire somebody who checks every single box, but it's just not somebody anybody's going to want to work with. I've made the mistake of the check every box hire a couple of times, and it always ends in tears. It always ends with disruption to the team. And people feeling upset or hurt or miffed. Just don't do it.
And learning from your mistakes is important, right? How else do you deal with failure?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I have been working really hard over the past probably like 5 or 6 years on building more resilience to things not going well. I'm not a perfectionist, except that I think that I personally must be perfect. So I don't necessarily expect everyone around me to be
Where does that
perfect,
come from, Jaime?
but I must be. Yeah, sorry, mom and dad. My dad did not find 4.0 was a high enough GPA. My parents did, they were very hard on me of growing up in terms of what they expected from me. I'm an oldest child of an oldest child. That's a curse, right? Um, so yeah, I think, letting go of some of that personal perfectionism is something I've been working on over the years, because failure is a teacher, right? Doing something that didn't work, that teaches you. But if you're just focused on the failure part of it, you're not going to focus on the lesson.
As you've grown to the leadership level you're at now, do you find yourself doing more self-evaluation than you did in those first few years? Or how did was it a conversation with somebody? Was it reading different things? How do you think you ultimately figured out, wait, there are things that obviously I'm going to do that I do wrong. How do I not beat myself up and turn one mistake into two, three, versus being able to move on and try not to replicate those mistakes, if that makes sense?
So a big part of it was getting a better understanding of defensiveness. A lot of times when somebody has criticism for something that you did or something isn't successful, you immediately feel defensive about it. And when you have that defensive feeling, that actually generally means that there's some grain of truth in it. So instead of getting defensive that something failed, sit a little bit and think about why wasn't this successful. It might not be something you've done. It might be something that was outside of your control. But instead of dwelling on the fact that you feel defensive that this thing wasn't successful, focus instead on what could you do differently the next time, or what can you learn from this. Um, and I think another big piece for me, I really think everybody needs to go to therapy, because that's, the things that they talk about in your personal life in therapy a lot of times can be applied to your professional life as well. And then for me, a big turning point moment, and I've talked about this a little bit. My dad passed away almost 4 years ago now, and that puts so much in perspective. Like the idea of not being successful at something at work paled in comparison to not being successful at saving my dad's life, which is like a really messed up way to look at what I was doing for my dad. I couldn't save his life, but it just put all of that into perspective and made it a little bit easier to say, okay, this didn't work out. Nobody died. What are we going to do next time? That kind of thing.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
Absolutely.
Where do you think self-confidence comes from? I get asked this a lot, and I'd love to get your point of view on it.
I would say having a sense of who you are that does not need external validation. As a person who had the upbringing I had of, a more perfectionist parent, really high expectations, really, really being able to sit and think through that and um, realizing that there's no silver bullet in that conversation, right? Like there's no way to get around um, who you are and what your lived experience is, but really focusing on that and making your decisions based on that, I think is important.
So a couple other final things, Jaime. During your time at Miami University in Ohio, I know you played a key role in the transition to a centralized communications model. Talk to me about just the value in ultimately being able to achieve that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's right for every university, but it was right for Miami, and it was right for Winston-Salem State, which we did this there too. But what we did was we brought all the college communicators into the university communications and marketing shop. And so the actual directors of communications for each college reported to a senior director of academic marketing and communications in my office. And then the directors of communications had a dotted line to their deans and remained situated with their deans. And then any staff that they had were pulled into the respective area within university communications. So if they had a graphic designer, they joined the creative services team. If they had a videographer, they joined the video team, writers, etc. And well, at first there was like a lot of tension about what this means. You're taking away my resources. The goal was now you have access to a huge pool of resources that's not dependent on one individual. So, you used to have one graphic designer, and if that person went on a 3-week vacation, went on maternity leave, left the institution, or for whatever reason, you know, you had this hole in your operation. Now, instead, if that person leaves, there's other designers that can support and help you that aren't completely new to what you're doing because they've been working with the designer that you had assigned to you before. So I think for me, at the end of the day, it helped make us better at particularly enrollment marketing. All the colleges were doing a different little slice of enrollment marketing. When we brought them together, we were able to see this is where the plans intersect. There are programs related to, for example, business in the business school, but there's also some in the art school. There's also some in the education program. How can we kind of combine these things and talk to future students about here are all the offerings if you're interested in business. Here are all the offerings if you're interested in career and healthcare that are spread across multiple colleges. And it just kind of breaks down those silos, which, I'm huge on busting silos. We have to break them down. And I think there were growing pains, and I'm sure there still are since I left. But I think at the end of the day, again, our audiences were served much better. Our prospective students were served much better thanks to making that choice.
And how do you know if it's not the right situation? And you mentioned, hey, it was right for Miami, it was right for Winston-Salem. How do you know it's not right for some of the schools?
Yeah, so I think that's part of that listening tour where you go and get to know and build relationships. One thing I found here is that there are a couple of the schools who really actually want to have that centralization, and it's a really good fit for them because they don't necessarily have anybody in their college who's savvy about marketing. Maybe it's the School of Nursing or something, and the nursing faculty don't have the marketing expertise, so it may make more sense there. Whereas in a business school where the dean has a PhD in marketing, maybe it doesn't make as much sense because he probably gets it at a different level. So I think it's not as simple as like this type of school or this size of school or this whatever, making it an easy decision. I think it's having those conversations with the deans and with other leaders about what are their goals and would those goals be better served by pulling people into university communications, or is it better to have more of a looser dotted line type situation?
You've obviously seen all the turnover, not only in the marketing levels, but admissions and other spots on higher
Mhm.
ed campuses, right? Especially over the last 36 months. Jaime, and I know this is maybe a hard one, but I would love to get your thoughts on it anyways. What do we as an industry in higher ed need to do differently in the coming weeks, months, and years to say, if we're going to develop the next generation of CMOs, VPs of enrollment, like what do we need to do differently to make sure either A, we're not losing some of this awesome young talent we have on campuses right now that doesn't ultimately feel like they're being matured the right way, if that makes sense, and or B, not have people look and go, yeah, that doesn't seem like something I'd be interested in doing. Any thoughts on just how as an industry we can do a better job of preparing the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we have to make these appear to be appealing jobs. And part of that is actually talking to people when they make the choice to leave higher ed. Why are they making that choice? What about this work is driving them away from it? And I think that one of the things we'll find is that the private sector has been a lot more nimble in responding to employee needs around hybrid and remote work. And that we need to think about that nimbleness and think about what we can do to create environments that sort of mimic and mirror those situations. I think, too, really leaning into the missional aspects of our work and hiring people who believe in the mission of higher education. In marketing offices, we have a lot of former journalists because journalists are idealists, and higher ed is something that we can look in the mirror and feel good about, quote unquote, selling. Um, but we have to really lean into that, and we don't wanna have just a whole shop full of former journalists, but we have to lean into that sense of mission, and really make that a selling point for our work. And then finally, as directors, associate vice presidents, and vice presidents, we need to be mentoring. We need to mentor people within our own spaces. You know, I learned a hard lesson that I did not do sufficient succession planning when I left Winston-Salem State, and they really struggled for a while to find their feet after I left. And so, you know, at Miami, I was really doing that succession planning and making sure that there was a strong number two and a strong number three if the number two left, so that if I did leave, there would be, you know, somebody in that space. And part of that is having a career pathway for people. I'm doing a panel discussion this afternoon for the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and I'm going to be talking about our career pathway project that we did at Miami. We found that people, one of the biggest things that was hindering morale was that people didn't feel like there was room for advancement. Some people had worked in their jobs for between 8 and 20 years with no title change, no significant pay increase, no significant change in their responsibilities. And so each director was charged with how do you chart out a path for each employee that helps them see that, you know, if they gain this skill, they can get this title and this salary increase, whether or not they want to manage people. So I think being much more intentional about those career pathways is going to be really, really critical for us in terms of recruiting and retaining staff.
The first of the final two things we do on every episode of Mission of Missions, Jaime, is a signature question I would love to get your answer to. Either what or who has been a very influential resource for you in your career?
That is great question. I would say the number one resource for me has been historically our nonprofit associations that we're part of. So the American Marketing Association, PRSA, CASE. CASE was the first association I was introduced to in my higher ed career, and leaning into the opportunities that we have for professional development, for building a network through those associations. I also really, really value the podcasts. There's so many higher ed marketing and enrollment podcasts out there with really great, smart people being interviewed. And I think there's just so much to learn from those conversations as well.
Last thing we're going to do is something I call fun rapid fire. So I'm just going to
All
give
right.
you a handful of things and I want to get some quick feedback on each of them, okay?
All right.
Best beach you've ever been to?
Ooh, that would be uh, probably Captiva in Fort Myers, Florida.
You can only choose one, the TV show Succession or Star Wars?
That's mean. That is so mean. Oh man, you're awful. I have to go with Star Wars because Star Wars gives me life, but ooh, life without Succession.
Who would play you in the movie version of your life?
Catherine Hahn. For
Okay.
sure, Catherine Hahn.
Cutest animal that is not a turtle.
What? Oh, this is awful. Okay, not a turtle. I'm going to go with a kitten. There's not much cuter than a kitten.
Totally agree. We have two.
Oh, gosh.
Best food you ever had at the Minnesota State Fair. I'm going to make the assumption that all those years living in Minnesota, at some point you went.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. You have to have the cheese curds. That's a must have. That squeaky feeling of cheese in your teeth is amazing.
I love that. And Sweet Martha's cookies, really hard to not pick up those as well. Jaime, I just
Yes.
appreciate you being on today and opening up and sharing so much for our listeners. If anybody wants to connect with you, what's the best way besides obviously going and listening to some of your podcasts, which I highly recommend? It is literally an amazing, amazing opportunity for easy, free professional development. What are other ways to get a hold of you?
Well, thank you very much. I am on Twitter at Jaime Hunt IMC, JaimeHunt IMC, and I'm on LinkedIn way more than I used to be. You'll actually find me there faster probably than Twitter. Otherwise, you can reach out to me at ODU j1hunt@odu.edu.
Awesome. Thank you again for sharing, Jaime.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mission Admissions with Jeremy Tiers. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at Enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at Enrollify.org.